Hey, we are here and live talking about building versus buying, two different ways you can create an MTA solution brought to you by Rockerbox. So excited to be here. Um, we'll quickly do some intros. I'm Ron Jacobson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Rockerbox. So I've been with Rockerbox since day one and super excited to be chatting about building versus buying. Nate, do you want to introduce yourself?
For sure. I'm Nate. I've been with Rockerbox a lot less time, only 6 months, but every day has been a blast, and I'm really excited to have the conversation today. Head of product
The
here.
last six That is true. Had a product. It's been 6 months of the best product work that we've had since starting Rockerbox. So there we go.
Uh,
Very.
Check back in 6 months.
There we go. Well, cool. We have a deck. We have some questions that we got from polling folks in advance. There's a chat though, so if anybody wants to ask any questions live or just say hi, feel free. I generally feel as much as we can be answering your questions while they're coming in, that's for the better. So please don't be shy. Otherwise, Nate and I will just be pontificating about this for the next bit of time. But again, excited to be here, and let's kick it off. Nate, I think let's start with you. This is a bit of a broader question, but why do companies consider building a solution in the first place? I guess we could ask that in general. Why do companies think about building versus buying, and then maybe a bit more specific to MTA, if you want to take
Yeah,
it away, Nate.
yeah. I'll just kind of kick the ball off, and we'll see where we get to here. I think as I was reflecting on this question this week, the thing that popped out to me is that the 2010s were this world where we really recognized the value of acquiring data. And I still remember sort of the flyers and the ads up in the elevators when I was at Amazon, talking about how big you could make your data lakes, talking about the vast quantities of data you could store. And I feel like one of the things that we're starting to realize in the 2020s is how important it is to have usable data, how important it is to have utility in all the data that you're collecting. And so when companies sit down and they contemplate building a solution, the conversations I've been in, elsewhere prior to Rockerbox have centered around that utility piece. How do I take a giant sort of pile of data, perhaps largely unstructured, in a data lake somewhere, and how do I make something that my marketing team can action against? And when it comes to the MTA piece, it comes down to decision-making value. How do I make sure that the insights that are relevant, that drive marketing decisions, get to the right people in a timely fashion with complete and accurate data underlying, so they can make the calls they need to make? And that need is evergreen.
I think that's true. I would certainly agree there. I think it's a. I spent a bunch of time thinking about this question myself, and I also think a lot about Rockerbox and like why we end up building things oftentimes when maybe we should be looking to partner or buy technology. I think a lot of it also starts with just like the culture of a company. A lot of companies have this culture of, we're builders. We have great engineers. We have great technologists. We have great, name it. It's not just buying technology. Why wouldn't we build it ourselves? And then we always start with the idea of, it can't be that hard. And when you combine those two mindsets together, it makes sense. Like if you have builders, smart people, folks that get joy out of that process, and you think it can't be that hard, that's the instinct, and I get it. We've done it more times than I can count on Rockerbox, where we've decided to build across building our own work queue solution internally to at one point building our own CMS internally. So we're just as guilty about this as anybody else. I'm actually just doing a quick speak. I think on the MTA side specifically, why do companies consider building? I think that I think it's a culture. Like you're only building if you have that culture. But I also think when you first start thinking about MTA, it doesn't seem that complicated. It's like, hey, I just need to put all the touch points, load somebody to convert into a path. 1, 2, 3, 4. How hard could that be? I already have a pixel on my website. I'm capturing clicks. So that's about it. And from that perspective, it's not wrong. Like that innately is not that difficult. There's a lot that we'll probably talk about in a couple of slides around like maintenance and going beyond clicks and identity resolution, all these sort of things that can make it incrementally harder and harder. But I fully get why conceptually at first the brand is just like, listen, I probably have all my click-through data. Why am I going to go pay somebody, 5 figures, 6 figures plus to go give me a solution? So I think this goes back to that idea. Like if you have a team of builders and when you first analyze a product, it doesn't seem that hard. A builder's going to build.
Yeah, the other thing I will call out that's come up for me is there's a perception internally among most companies that their needs are special, that the things that they're trying to build are required because they have a unique footprint in some fashion or another on the data side, and that an out-of-box solution just wouldn't fit what they need to deliver as far as decision making, as far as completeness, as far as data freshness, whatever it may be. And I think that as companies, we tend to overvalue that perception, and we undervalue the cost of getting to that custom solution. And you kind of got at that when you talked about a builder's culture. It is often harder than you realize.
Yeah, it is. But listen, it can also be, there's the other side of this. There are some companies that truly are unique, right? And truly do have reasons why they potentially do want to build something themselves. So I think if you're being honest with yourself and looking internally, just really starting to consider like, am I really that special snowflake, or am I potentially more common than I want to believe? Which is actually a benefit. If you are more standard and you can actually get your edge on other dimensions versus building out software, or at least that piece of software, you can focus on what do I do with the data? How do I take action on it? And I think that's where there's potentially a ton of value. Cool. Let's go ahead. Let's see what's next. And also, again, for folks that are joining, we got a bunch more folks. Please, if you have any questions, want to chat live, go for it. Question 2. So I guess stemming off question 1, let's assume you're that company that did decide to build a solution. Next question that obviously makes sense: what actually goes into building that solution? Nate, do you want to take a pass, or should I go first? What do you think?
I can take a high level pass from, like, if I were sketching this out on the product side. Like, I think you have a number of different pieces. Like, I think piece 1 is, do I have signal from all of my marketing channels? And the answer typically at the start of a project is like, I have signal from 60 to 80% of my channels, and there's a bunch that are going to be really painful I have to get to, that I have to either rule in scope or decide not to tackle in the first version of this. Once you know you have signal, the next piece is making sure that you can normalize and clean the data. And I think that that is one of the classic areas where it is often harder than it looks to get that right, because data will come in. Sometimes it will come in at different times of day. Sometimes it won't come in daily. Sometimes it comes in batches. And the sheer load involved in getting the data from however it appears in your systems into a normalized and clean table is considerable. So you have to tackle that piece. And then from there, you actually have to get into, how do you build modeling off of the clean data that you have? And then from the modeling to the presentation layer, and from the presentation layer, finally to the actionability and insights layer. And so that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I'd echo into that a little bit. Like you talked about where you have signal versus where you don't. To me, that means which channels can you measure and which channels can't you measure. And I think that's also one where, as a marketer, you're going to have to start to prioritize. Like, are you going to be able to, from day one, like, let's be honest, you have to, from day one, measure clicks from like Google and Facebook, right? You know, that's going to be 80% of your ad spend likely. So clicks are probably going to be relatively easy. You're then going to say, hey, what's my next channel? Maybe it's like linear TV. And like, that's, I think, a really good example of one where there is no like de facto way to build it out. There's no like a squared plus b squared equals c squared rule of science for how you measure linear TV. You need to figure it out. You need to figure out what data sets do you need. Are you going to use post logs? Are you going to go by ACR data sets? Once you have the data, you're going to have to figure out like, how do you model against that? On the post log side, how do you model from an event happening at a time and location against on-site activity? From an ACR data set, yes, it is user level, but how do you think about extrapolating that? Because you're maybe only getting ACR for 20% of the TVs in market versus 100%. So like, that's going, you've gone to your next channel, linear TV. How do you get the data? How do you think to model it? But then it's your next channel, your next channel, your next channel. So I think it's also very much an approach of like, which channels am I live on? How important are all of them? And how do I think about prioritizing each of those channels? Another really interesting part about building your own MTA solution comes across understanding your own funnel. Do you have a simple funnel? Is it just like a website, a web-based purchase that's relatively simple? Is it a bit more complicated? Are you like an insurance company that maybe has a web-based application and then there will be an application approved or rejected 30 minutes, 1 hour, 1 day later. You have to connect those two dots using some form of identity resolution. Do you have offline marketing, offline events? Are you like a Warby Parker's a client of Rockerbox? Like, how do we have to connect their web to their in-store to their mobile app? How do you start connecting those dots? So these are all things that people need to tackle. They're doable. At least some of these are. I mean, going and trying to collect as much data as you possibly can, thinking through modeling, thinking through identity resolution. But then I think the part that we always get to, Nate, I'm curious to get your take here, is fine, you built your first model. What do you have to do to keep it going, to keep it running, a week later, a month later, a quarter later?
Yeah, that's kind of where my head was going as you were talking. And I have a specific example in mind that I've been kicking around. It's this idea of a channel starting out at the beginning of your attribution model. You have a thesis that this channel plays top of funnel or mid funnel or bottom of funnel. And then you discover as you invest in it, you discover as you start to play in the channel, it actually has much more wide-ranging impacts, and you need to update your model accordingly. And to give a specific example, TikTok began with, I think, this widespread perception that TikTok could be top of funnel. You have long form video, short form video. You need to be able to connect with people. And then TikTok launched, this direct shopping feature, right? They launched the ability to actually get into the e-commerce transactional space. And all of a sudden, TikTok went from being something where, yes, it's awareness, yes, it's driving into your marketing mix. Now it could potentially be driving straight to a conversion. And so how do you recognize that these product capabilities from your partner channels are continually evolving, and therefore you need to evolve your underlying picture of your funnel to match that? And then multiply that times 30, right?
30 different channels you're on? Yeah, definitely. Something that I hear a lot when it comes to clients that want to build their MTA solution. These are often clients also that, or potential clients, I guess, that have likely invested in some sort of first-party pixel. Mm-hmm. So maybe they're using Segment's first-party pixel, maybe they're using Snowplow's first-party pixel. And for them, similarly, they're sort of like, hey, I already have a lot of this data. I have, sessions data, I have clickstream data. Maybe it's already being funneled into or synced into my data warehouse. So doesn't that, make it easier for me to build my own MTA solution? Honestly, I think the answer is yes. I think that's a better starting point for a brand than not having their own first-party pixel. If you're one of those companies who have that, things that you should be thinking about are, one, the quality of the data. So yes, you could have all the sessions, but if you have, going to Nate's point before, upper funnel campaigns in Google being called prospecting, upper funnel being called upper funnel in Facebook, and being called branding in TikTok, those are three different terms that mean the same thing. So this is where you have to start doing work in terms of normalizing all these different campaign structures across different channels, so you can actually start to get to the last part of building your MTA solution, which we haven't really even touched on at all. Actually building a data-driven attribution model. The main reason people at the end of the day, I find, actually don't want to build their MTA solution is because of the modeling part. They feel that they have the data. It's not that hard to get the data. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. But they're like, we need to build a model that's unique for us. And that's definitely doable. And I have to admit, I would imagine a company could build a better model just bespoke to themselves than somebody could do with generalized. Not fully true, but somewhat true. But that normalizing of data is going to be really, really key to that. So just if you're in that, hey, I need to build my own MTA solution, thinking through what do you do to make sure you get clean data on every single click, on every single view, is going to be key for you.
And that complexity scales non-linearly. So you gave an example of 3 different channels. You can imagine how every single channel you add, you're adding multiple graph points that you have to connect back to the other channels. And every time you have a non-standard attribution name somewhere in the mix, it adds a disproportionate layer of complexity. And so you add more and more and more channels, your complexity is going to scale like a hockey stick. It gets really challenging to sort of manage that complexity just in the data preparation side.
Thinking of other areas. I'm actually trying to really think hey, if I'm in your shoes trying to build, what tips would be helpful? Because again, if people are going to build, I'd rather them build it successfully.
Single threaded ownership. That's one of the ones I want to call out. The folks who are successful at this, dedicate time and resources and have a single threaded owner and sort of feature this as a first class object on their roadmaps. Like, this is not something you can build around the edges and be successful with.
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting point. We're talking to a prospect now. They're a pretty large brand, and they have their own MTA built in house. And we're actually talking to them about moving from their MTA to Rockerbox. We can talk to why potentially. But it was really interesting hearing about them. They have a backlog for their own internal MTA so product of, I think, just I'm making this up a bit, but between 25 to 35 tickets of feature requests and bug requests. Well, feature requests and bugs that were found against their existing in-house model. So it's a really good point to what they just kind of call out there. It's not just the single-threaded owner to get a build, but the realization that there will be, you give a mouse a cookie, they're going to want more milk. That is 100% going to be the case with building your own MTA solution in house. So just make sure you have the resources for it, not just for the build, but for the quarter to a year to come after that.
It's a good tip for product in general. Actually, it's not done when you launch it.
That is true. The next slide, I think, talks about some of the pitfalls potentially of building, but I just want to actually pause for a second. Does anybody who's we have like 25 folks or so here that I assume some of you must be considering building your own MTA solution because you're in this webinar. Does anybody have any specific questions around the building part of it that they'd like us to potentially touch on? If you want to chat it out, go for it. If not, we're going to move a little bit forward, but I figured we'd give a second to see if anybody has any specific questions. Yay, thank you.
Looks like we might have a question here.
Maybe.
While we're waiting, I'm actually really curious, when you have sort of tackled MTA building, like either through Rockerbox or in past lives, what is the part that has been the most challenging?
I'm trying to decouple implementing it from clients from the actual build process of it. I'm debating just between data quality and there's data quality in the moment and data quality after the fact. I think those might be the two biggest things that have been challenges for us. Data quality in the moment is the example of, we're looking at the path to conversion data for last week, and we're realizing that we forgot to traffic UTMs for the last week. So the marketer org is something like, oh crap, what do we do with that? What do we do with the last week worth of data? So that's almost an issue where like we have data issues today that are stemming from things that happened in the past. And that requires like organizational change for them to really, companies to really be thoughtful around making sure that everything that gets traffic has the right information on it. I'll go so far, like we had to build internal to Rockerbox, and we haven't done it for every platform. I wish we would, and I would like us to at some point. We should add it to the roadmap, Nate. But automatic query string parameters. And like the reason why we do that is because it mitigates that problem. It makes it so that automatically, without anybody needing to know it, we guarantee on every click on every view we get the right data. So that kind of fixes the issue of the data quality today. The second one I'd say would be the data quality issues that emerged today from missing data in the past. So it's a bit nuanced. What I mean here is it's February 1st. All of a sudden we get data from the first 2 weeks of January that are just delayed. That's more for things like linear TV. That's more for things like direct mail. Even some podcasts I've seen like that. That's the lagging data. It's how you treat that. It's difficult because one is just like logistically difficult. I'm getting data from weeks ago that now have to be processed and backfilled. It's also difficult from an organization because in a way, the world just changed. So on February 1st, the first 2 weeks, maybe Meta had a CPA of 20. On February 2nd, now Meta CPA is 30 because we got more data. So dealing with that, both from a technical perspective and an organizational perspective, I've seen to be really, really challenging.
We've got a bunch of questions here. And I actually think that the answer you gave sort of ties into the last one around sort of how we do reality checks on our data and sort of how we know what's true. And I'd be curious if you want to expand on the idea that like you end up having to restate the past. And like, if we look at it more broadly, what does understanding what truth is look like when you have a solid MTA model and a solid foundation for data?
Yeah, I mean that's a big question. It's interesting too because truth changes.
Mm-hmm.
It changes as you get more data, right? Like the truth of a click-only path to conversion is very different than the truth of a click plus view only path to conversion. Um, this also comes to the thing of like a word that will come up all the time is discrepancies when you're building out MTA solutions. There's a discrepancy between, let's even remove Rockerbox from this. There's a discrepancy between what GA says the CPA for Facebook is and what Facebook says the CPA for Facebook is. I think it's really important to be able to distinguish between discrepancies and differences. And it seems really nuanced, but to me, a discrepancy is when two different providers are reporting out the same KPI differently. So that means I am saying Facebook spend yesterday was $1,000. Facebook says Facebook spend yesterday was $2,000. That's a discrepancy in the data. A difference is when there are different results when you're looking at sort of different KPIs. So if Facebook says their CPA yesterday was 20 and Rockerbox says it was 50, there's a difference there, but it's because we're actually looking at a different world. Meta's only measuring themselves. Rockerbox or any MTA product measures all channels. So like that's a difference that is expected versus just a discrepancy when the same KPI is discrepant across two different locations. I don't know if I explained that really well, but it's just, it comes up all the time as you're doing this. So it's keep it back of your mind. Some of the questions here, we can go through this a little bit, and we'll keep going forward with the deck as well. Domenico asked what kind of algorithm / model should be considered. You have classic rule-based models. That's your first touch, last touch, even weight U-shaped model. There's also linear as well. So like there's a classic U-shaped models, rule-based models. By that it means like there's a predefined rule that is being applied on top of your data. It has nothing to do with your data. There's then data-driven attribution methodologies. This is where you're building a model, a modeled approach to fractionally allocate credit to every single touch point based off that brand, that customer's data, and even more so on a specific conversion event. And the last point is really critical because if you're building a data-driven model for your add to cart conversion event, it should be different than your model for your purchase conversion event. Because there's a world where Meta does a great job of driving upper funnel, but does a really poor job of converting that person. Classic example would be you get the well, I'll ask you a different one. The role of affiliate, right? Affiliate might do a really poor job of driving add to cart, but does a really good job of driving that purchase because you add something in a cart you're about to buy, you go search for a discount, so you'll find it in the middle there. So you want to make two different models there. That's a world where even though affiliate comes between the add to cart and the purchase, maybe they're actually not driving a conversion. It's not incremental. So anyway, you really want to make sure you're building models on a per conversion basis. David has a good question. I'll pass this to Nate. We'll see if you have a take on this. Do you have an opinion on how marketing channel platform data policy change would potential impact the decision of build first party versus buy long term? So basically, I think the question is, are all the policy privacy changes in the world happening? ITP, ATT, GDPR, CCPA, pick another acronym. What's the impact of those in the decision to build versus buy? I have a take, but I'll pass it to Nate first if you do.
Yeah, this is one that's on my mind a lot. I think it's on the mind of a lot of product people in this space. At the end of the day, we saw the big headline where, Google is pushing back the date for third-party cookie deprecation. I'll bet you a lunch, Ron, that it's not in 2025 either. And I think the reason why is because fundamentally everyone knows that the world of third-party cookies is going away. Everyone knows that privacy is a mega trend that is coming, but no marketer is super satisfied with the answers that they get on some of their channels without third party. Like we've gotten used to a world in the 2010s where we had this, and maybe it was a fantasy all along, but we had this idea of deterministic identity where we could just say, this is this person and this is what they did. And this is what they did all across the web. And then they made this choice here and they purchased. And I think that we are going to need to, at a very high level, move to a world where we understand where to put our next dollar. We understand what the incremental value of our channels is. We understand the relative value of content that we're launching in marketing. But we may no longer have, in as many channels as we did, this idea of deterministic identity. And where we do have it, it's going to feel like a part of the picture, not the whole picture. So even if you put first-party cookies on your site, you get a picture of what's on the site, but you don't necessarily have the ability you had before these privacy changes started to roll out, where you could say, I can reliably match this back across a much wider range of web behavior. And so to me, when I get that question, I think that the correct answer is you want to be building toward the larger scale questions that your marketing team will need to answer, and that really marketing teams have always needed to answer. Where does the next dollar go has been an evergreen question for us. And so when I look at this, I think it's less about, I don't think you get a ton of advantage from just building, because part of the load that like companies like Rockerbox, and we're not the only ones in the space, pick up is we pick up the burden of keeping track and obsessing over those privacy changes and what it means to your funnel. Because even though we talk about it as a singular megatrend, it's arriving in a very fragmented way, and it requires a great deal of attention to detail to make sure that you stay up to date and compliant. And I know we have work, as we continue to evolve virtually every quarter on this. And so to me, I think that part of the answer here is, what is the compliance burden that you want to pick up over the long term? Pass it back to you, Ron.
Yeah, I actually think increasing privacy trends, which are not going away, will make it so it's more beneficial for brands to work with third parties versus not. And I'll say why, because it seems possibly counterintuitive. Rockerbox needs to find privacy compliant ways of getting access to view through data from Pinterest that we're able to join on first party data for our clients. We need to be able to do that across multiple hundreds of brands. So we're highly incentivized to figure out and continue to invest in like, what is the latest in terms of privacy regulations? How can we integrate in a compliant way? And how can we actually do this in a way that gives clients access to data that will be very hard for them to get themselves? It's very hard for any brand to individually go to Pinterest and say, hey, give me all the user level view through data. Pinterest will do it to Rockerbox because we work across hundreds of clients. Rockerbox can invest in this and put all the time and energy in doing it because we're amortizing that cost across our hundreds of clients, both in terms of time and actual, we have money coming in against it. So like in a way, like we've taken on the burden of figuring out how do we integrate everything in a way that's going to be privacy compliant. And I hear more and more from clients, they would rather outsource that headache to a third party like Rockerbox so that they can really focus on the headache that they need to own, which is, hey, I need to make sure that I understand which of my customer data I can pass to a third party, how I can make sure that gets either, or in cases where it has to be opted in, I'm getting opt-in. In cases where it's opted out, I'm getting opt-out, and passing that forward. So like, I think that is enough of a burden for a brand to think about themselves. I wouldn't want to think about the burden then of also taking that and saying, okay, now that I've gotten opt-in from client X from a@gmail.com, how can I go and get all these other vendors to tell me if they serve a@gmail.com, an impression? That's in a way I view that as Rockerbox's burden. So yeah, I think leveraging vendors whose expertise is in dealing with these privacy issues is potentially a really smart way to go. Just for time's sake, we can keep, and I'm happy to talk more about that too, but I just want to make sure we keep going through some of these main pitfalls companies forget to consider. I'll start with one. I think they forget to consider that it is going to be really hard to get access to data. So like if you want to, if you think view through channels, be that Facebook, I'll end with Facebook, Pinterest, Snapchat, TikTok, Reddit, CTV, programmatic advertising. If you think getting impression level data from those is going to be important for your media mix, it's going to be very, very hard for an individual brand to get access to those straight up. Secondly, if you think view through data is important for Facebook and Meta, you're going to have to do modeling on top of that to try to model the impact of those views on what's happening on your website. I think brands underestimate the difficulty in doing that because, again, it goes back to there's no A squared plus B squared equals C squared here. There's no like law of nature that says how you should do the modeling. You're going to need to bring somebody in-house to develop that. And there's a bit of an art to it, to be frank with you. So I'd call it those. I think are the biggest pitfalls I see. Forgetting about lack of data that's both deterministic, like I was mentioning with the Pinterest and things like that, and probabilistic with Meta YouTube. This is actually really, really, really important though, because if you're going to go build and invest in this whole in-house MTA solution, and you then go present this to your exec team, and they ask you a question, what percentage of marketing touchpoints do we think we're missing? The higher that number is, the lower the confidence will be from your exec team. And that's just the hardest gap to fill. It's filling in those hard to measure channels. Linear TV, direct mail, these are all things where you need to make sure when you're presenting internally, you have high confidence that yes, we are able to measure this as well as possible and it's in the model. But getting access to that data and figuring out how to connect it to what's happening in the property is something that seemingly everybody who's building an MTA solution underweighs, I think, the difficulty of that.
I think that's a really good one. Another one I want to call out, I know we've touched briefly on some of these in the earlier questions. So, we talked a little bit about how difficult it is to normalize and clean the data or collect the data from certain hard to reach channels. But one that's at the very end of the value chain, sort of in the what do we do with the data category, I think companies often underweight or undervalue the last mile in terms of how you use and leverage the data. And so if you talk to both marketers and also data analysts who are leveraging data that you've put together, and let's assume that you have successfully completed all the other steps. You've got, high quality data that you've normalized. You've got a good set of models that you're working off of. You can present what you have both in the UX and in table structures that your data analysts can go and get to. Great. Now you still have to make sure that you've prioritized the set of business rules and business processes needed to make good use of that data on an ongoing basis. And that requires standing up metrics. It requires standing up the business processes that go with those metrics, like weekly reviews. It requires building and reusing decks that you would present either to marketing leadership or potentially to company leadership. And it requires closing the loop and actually building in what do we do with the data and how did we learn from our choice. And I find that sort of getting to that last piece is something that is really, really hard.
Thinking of other ones. I think another common pitfall is thinking that you can nail it. Like thinking that you can do this internally and come out with a perfect product. And I don't mean that in like a condescending way. I mean it, like I get it. Like that's why you want to start building it. But really going into it thinking, we can do this. We can get every single marketing touch point. We can do this ourselves, and then we'll have perfect measurement. You won't get perfect measurement with Rockerbox. You won't get perfect measurement with any of our competitors. So just please make sure that when you're talking internally that you preset expectations of what you're building, the gaps that are going to happen, and also even the cons of something like MTA. I'll give you an example. Like MTA is not going to be the best tool for you to do your forecasting for the next month or quarter. It's not going to be the best tool to help you figure out the incrementality of a test you're running. It's going to be a great tool to help you understand what's the path to conversion, what's the time to conversion, what's the overlap between channels, is the channel getting in front of new versus repeat customers, retroactively allocating credit so you can know what the CPA of a channel is retroactive. Like it has its needs, but just please don't pitch this to your execs. Hey, we're going to build MTA. We're going to know how to measure our marketing, and we're going to fix. Our marketing isn't doing that well. Once we have our MTA built, we're going to be able to fix that, and suddenly everything's going to be working. It's not going to be the case. You might have a lot better direction, but it's still going to be hard to find those nuggets of gold that you can actually use to scale your business.
Yeah, we're not talking about a perfect world either way.
Sadly. What's the time commitment required for the initial work and ongoing maintenance? Nate, do you want to give this a go?
Yeah, I think this was one of those questions you and I actually kicked around internally, and I think
we did.
It depends on the scale of the business you're running is probably the most truthful answer. I think the back of the napkin sketch I threw up initially as we were brainstorming for this conversation was, give me 10 engineers in 18 months or something like that. And I can put something up, but then you're going to have ongoing maintenance. It won't be 10 engineers, but like call it 3 or 4. And that scales up when you have a bigger business, a more sort of $1 billion plus enterprise revenue kind of business. And it obviously would scale down if you have a business that's under $100 million in revenue. And so I think the truth is you have to evaluate what is the channel complexity? Like, you have to talk about the parameters that drive the complexity of the work. I think channel complexity is one of them. I think data size and data dirtiness are another one. And I know that's a bit hand wavy, but I think it's still a factor. And then I think the expected number of distinct use cases at the other end of the pipeline is also worth it. Like, if you have teams sitting in Singapore, Frankfurt, and New York, and they have different needs and they're working through different privacy regimes, and there's a lot of sort of different workflows that they're executing even within a common overall business structure, you're going to have a more complicated piece of work than if your team is all seated in one place. You have one data compliance regime to deal with, and you can work through a more sort of consistent and unitary stack.
I'm going to give my more optimistic more optimistic take of this. I don't think Nate's wrong. I'm saying, if I imagine a smaller company potentially first want to kick off this project, what do I think that they would actually resource to it, and where would that get them? And Nate, you can tell me where I'm right and wrong after this, because Nate normally does that. My gut says you're kicking this off with 2 full-time engineers, a data scientist, and an analyst. I think that's going to be the core that you go into this with. I think it's faster to do it today with things like Fivetran and Segment and a rudder staff. Like, you can start to get the pieces together. And my gut says you can get something dirty, rough and dirty out there in 3 to 6 months. I'll put a rough thing out there. I think, though, you're going to need those people on it for at least that core group of four made folks, kind of in perpetuity. I go back to the example I said before. The company, they have a backlog of 32 product requests related to their MTA. And when I actually heard the product request list, it was actually kind of funny, because it wasn't that dissimilar than the product requests that we get at Rockerbox too. So in a way, like, they're trying to build themselves what we built ourselves across all of our customers. Now, my estimate, I think, is actually, again, for a smaller revenue brand, probably less geographically diverse, probably just buying on the main ad platforms. I think Nate's is much more accurate for our kind of the enterprise level client that Rockerbox works with primarily.
Yeah, and so I think maybe if you want to take a common takeaway here, the thing that I would call out is whether you're resourcing 4 heads against it or 12 or more, you need to assume you have ongoing costs that amount to multiple full-time equivalent personnel regardless. And
Yes.
so you're not done when you're done. It's an ongoing built-in cost you're budgeting for. And then I think the other thing Ron sort of hints at, go ahead.
I'll just one quick thing there.
Oh, he dropped off.
I'm back. Sorry, go ahead, Nate.
The other thing that Ron sort of hinted at that I want to label and call out is you need to define really clearly what done looks like in order to get to a successful launch. Because Ron rightly called out that if you're trying to do something that is directionally correct, if you're trying to do something that is going to get you to a rough and ready picture of your marketing channels, then you can do that much more quickly than if your value is on capturing 100% of spend across a larger channel footprint. And you want to make sure that you have really, really high fidelity views that you can use to drive precise allocations of spend. And so it's incumbent upon you as the person choosing to make the build or buy decision to say, what does good look like?
One other red flag I'll call it here, a lot of folks, even going with the numbers that we just said, 4 to 12 to whatever it is, they also think once it's built, then it's going to be only like 20% of someone's time. That's just not the case.
No.
Ultimately, how do you know which option is best for you? I'll give my take on this. I think that if you're a large enough organization and you're spending enough money on marketing, like, you really need to be spending a significant amount of money to think about the perpetual amount of investment you're going to need in your media mix model, in your MTA product. I think that if you kind of start doing that math, take five employees times the salary, divide that by my marketing spend per year. Um, if you start to think about it from that perspective, and you think that you're going to be able to get access to the data assets that you need, you can consider building. Um, as long as you continue to make that ROI case internally, I think the question I would have if I'm you is why? It's why am I building it versus using a third party? What edge am I going to get by doing this in house versus using another? If you don't really have an answer to that question, I don't think you'll be able to justify the cost internally because an external provider should be cheaper. If you do have an answer to that question, I'd love to hear it. And if anybody has it, please message it. Generally, it's kind of what Nate said. People end up doing this when they think there's something really unique about their business, really unique about their conversion funnel. Maybe they have really unique marketing events. Maybe they're a medical company and they have doctors that are going in person meeting with patients. Like, I mean, there could be unique ways of thinking about it, but like, really just ask that why. Like, why do we think we are going to get some unique edge as a company by building this internally versus taking those resources and using them to work on the output of an external measurement provider. An external measurement provider who needs to maintain stability and maintain integrations and maintain all the privacy compliance and things like that. I'll go to this, like the canonical example though is Uber. Uber built a huge marketing science team in-house. And I haven't spoken to them, but I wonder if they do have the size and scale and complexity of their business, you know, the driver side, the passenger side, the multiple geographies, the app, the web. They spend a ton of money. Like, I kind of see a world where that makes sense for them. Many smaller companies, though, my gut says it's probably not the case. And even for those smaller companies, I'd even question at times, just make sure you're large enough to even need third-party measurement. If you're just live on one channel spending, 20K a month, you don't need measurement. Just use a channel and use Google Analytics and you'll be fine. So that's kind of my rough take. Nate, how do you think about it?
I have a very sort of product-centric perspective. I think one of the most important decisions that PMs make is what is the highest and best use of the engineering hours that they have on the table for a given month or a given quarter. And when you look at it that way, I think you have to ask yourself, am I putting my data resources, my engineering resources against something that is enabling us to truly differentiate our business, that truly builds on our core competitive advantage as a business? Or am I putting those precious hours into something that has already been largely solved by the market and is fairly commoditized? And the answer, I think, for like 80% of businesses is this is a solved problem, and you can probably choose to purchase it or choose to solve it with like in-house tooling that you can get off the shelf really easily, maybe Google Analytics, as Ron was saying. And then I think there's going to be a few businesses that are extremely complex in their footprint and where they look at the differentiated value that marketing provides to them. And they say, no, getting this right is our core competitive advantage. We will prioritize this. We will build in-house. And that's sort of how I approach that.
David asked a question. Curious, why do we only support Segment for CDP/Pixel for integration? What about things like RudderStack and even Google GTM? We do support RudderStack and Google GTM for Rockerbox Pixel integration. So apologies if either we miscommunicated or maybe I'm not understanding the question fully. Also, happy if you want to email Ron at rockerbox.com, we can talk about that. But I've single-handedly done probably 100 of our client GTM implementations, getting our pixels there. We have a pre-built GTM template that clients can leverage. We have a lot of clients who, well, not a lot, but we do have clients who leverage RudderStack as well. Maybe the question is, why do we not leverage their first-party pixel and just the data from that versus requiring Rockerbox's pixel to be placed on site? That goes into us wanting our own first-party CDN pixel. We have our own ways that we think about setting and capturing on-site data. An example is we have automations around things like capturing first-party data around an email capture or phone number capture so that we can do better identity resolution as a source, not a destination. Oh, yeah, there you go. It's something we're thinking about, though, to be honest. Is there a way that we could or should be able to leverage third-party, first-party pixel? Well, that's funny. A third-party, first-party pixel. Third-party to Rockerbox, first-party pixel instead of our own first-party pixel. We're just not there yet. Yeah.
I think that positioning ourselves as a first-party pixel gives us a long-term strategic advantage in the privacy space as well, because it means that in a lot of these situations where we talk about third-party deprecation, we're not a third-party pixel, first-party pixel.
Thinking a bit more on that, like the identity resolution part is a huge component of all this, and we honestly haven't spoken enough about that. You need to build to do our job well. We do identity resolution waterfalls, where the top of the waterfall is first party, not first party. Usual level first party data, email, phone number, physical mailing address. Beneath that, we start having some probabilistic identity resolution as well. That's where we do modeling, for example, to gauge the impact of things like CTV against your website. There's not 100% deterministic. We do modeling approach there. Part of having our pixel on website also just ensures that we get it basically increases our likelihood of being able to do identity resolution versus getting all the way to the bottom of the funnel and saying, we can't connect this on-site event with any marketing data. That's a part of it as well. Awesome. Question and answer. I have a question. Why should anybody not use Rockerbox? My answer is everybody should use Rockerbox. Sorry. When the ad is delivered, your first party pixel is now third-party context and subject to blocking/deleting. When the ad is delivered or our first party pixel is delivered?
Yeah, I'm not sure I follow the question either.
So there are multiple. So we put a first party pixel on the client's website. That's to capture on-site data. That's clicks, sessions, client-side conversion events. Those are all done in a first party capacity. We CNAME into a client's website. Yeah.
I wonder if the question or assumption is that we somehow are putting first party pixels on display ads, as I read that question again.
No, yeah, good question. So no, we're not. So
right.
Programmatic view through is the one thing that's most going to be impacted by the deprecation of third-party cookies. There is no good solve to that, not by Rockerbox or anybody else. The closest solve that is happening to market are some of the work where you're going to be targeting based off first-party identifiers to target the target CNN. The fortunate part is that generally programmatic view through it's a sub 1% of our clients' ad spend. It's generally around 0.04%, rather 0.4%. But yeah, that is an area that's going to be impacted by the deprecation of third-party cookies.
It's amazing how the web has changed too, because I remember when it was not 0.4% at all.
By the way, that was one of my biggest surprises when we first launched our attribution business. So before our attribution business, Rockerbox actually managed programmatic advertising for a lot of brands. And we work with giant brands, Citibank and Chase and Vanguard. We manage their ad dollars. And when we first launched our attribution product, I thought that the number one challenge for us would be how do we measure programmatic for our clients. And then I realized what a small portion of their budget programmatic was. And even deeper that, what a small portion of that view through was. And that's when it was an awakening for myself.
Any other questions?
Awesome. Well, I'll say Domenico, David, Yanmei. Apologies if I mispronounce anyone's names, but thank you for asking questions. It's more fun when we get to hear from you. Happy to chat at any point at the ron@rockerbox.com. N Jones, correct me if I'm right, but N Jones at rockerbox.com. Happy to chat at any point. But thanks so much for joining us for this webinar. If there are any other topics you'd be interested in too, let us know. Happy to do more. Thank you, Nate. Thanks for taking the time. Enjoyed it.
It was a delight. Thanks all.